For the next few days, nobody spoke to Linda. Not really. Family group chats went silent. Phone calls stopped. Invitations disappeared. It was as if 34 years of trust had vanished overnight. As in many ways, it had. The hardest conversation came 3 days later, when Jason and I sat down with Emily. She was only 8 years old, too young to understand affairs, too young to understand DNA reports, too young to understand decades of lies. But children always know when something is wrong. "Why is Grandma crying all the time?" Emily asked. My heart broke. Jason took her hand and gave the simplest explanation possible. "Grandma made some mistakes a long time ago." Emily looked confused. "Big mistakes?" Jason nodded. "Very big mistakes." Then Emily asked a question nobody expected. "Does she still love me?" The room fell silent, because despite everything, Emily still loved her grandmother. Children are incredible that way. They don't carry years of resentment. They don't obsess over revenge. They just love. Jason smiled sadly. "Yes. Then I forgive her," Emily said. I felt tears fill my eyes, because the person showing the most maturity in the entire family was an 8-year-old child. A week later, Jason made a decision. He contacted Michael, his biological father, the man he'd never met, the man he'd spent 34 years not knowing existed. To everyone's surprise, Michael replied immediately, and what happened next shocked us all. Michael had no idea. Linda had lied. Again. She never told him she was pregnant. Never. Instead, she had sent one letter. One. And after never hearing back, she assumed he'd abandoned her. The truth? Michael had never received it. Not a single letter. Not a single message. Not a single phone call. For 34 years, he never knew he had a son. When Jason told him the truth, the man cried. Actually cried. The first video call loss. If someone had told me that my mother-in-law would eventually destroy her own life trying to destroy mine, I wouldn't have believed them. But that's exactly what happened. And it all started at my daughter Emily's 8th birthday party. The moment is burned into my memory. Every detail. Every word. Every expression. The smell of vanilla frosting. The sound of children laughing in the backyard. The bright Colorado sunshine pouring through our kitchen windows. It should have been one of the happiest days of my daughter's life. Instead, it became the day everything started falling apart. Or so I thought. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 38 years old. I teach 3rd grade at a public elementary school in Denver, Colorado. I've been married to my husband Jason for 10 years. And until recently, I believed I understood what family meant. I believed that if you treated people with kindness, eventually they'd treat you the same way. I was wrong, especially when it came to my mother-in-law, Linda Mitchell. The first time I met Linda, she smiled at me, but her eyes didn't. You know the kind of smile I'm talking about, the one that never reaches someone's face, the one that says, "I'm being polite because I have to, not because I want to." Jason never noticed it. Or maybe he didn't want to. After all, Linda was his mother, the woman who raised him, the woman he trusted more than anyone. At least back then. During our first family dinner together, Linda spent the entire evening asking me questions. Questions that sounded innocent, but weren't. Where did I grow up? How much money did my parents make? Why hadn't I pursued a higher-paying career? Did I plan on continuing to work after having children? Did I think Jason deserved someone more ambitious? That last question wasn't even disguised. She actually asked it, right in front of everyone. I remember looking at Jason, waiting for him to say something, waiting for him to defend me. Instead, he laughed awkwardly. "Mom doesn't have a filter." That became his excuse for years. Mom doesn't have a filter. Mom didn't mean it that way. Mom's just being honest. Mom's old-fashioned. Mom's protective. Mm, mm. Mom's. Always mom. Never me. Till I tried. For years I tried. I bought her thoughtful birthday gifts. Invited her over for holidays. Included her in family traditions. Called her on Mother's Day. Helped her after surgery. Drove her to appointments. Listened when she needed someone to talk to. I kept hoping one day she'd accept me. One day she'd realize I wasn't her enemy. One day she'd finally see me as family. That day never came. Then Emily was born. And everything got worse. Much worse. Emily was the most beautiful baby I'd ever seen. She had huge curious eyes. Tiny dimples. And a smile that could light up an entire room. The moment Jason held her for the first time, he cried. Actually cried. I had never seen him cry before. Not once. But holding his daughter? That broke him. In the best possible way. For the first few months everything seemed normal. Linda visited often. Brought gifts. Took pictures. Showed Emily off to her friends. I thought maybe becoming a grandmother had softened her. Maybe this was a fresh start. Maybe we'd finally found common ground. I should have known better. Started with little comments. Tiny things. Easy to dismiss. Easy to ignore. First. Linda would stare at Emily. She doesn't have Jason's nose. A few weeks later. Interesting. She'd tilt her head. Nobody in our family has eyes that color. Then. She's cute. Pause. She just doesn't look like a Mitchell. Every comment hit me like a paper cut. Small. But painful. And impossible to forget. Jason always brushed it off. Mom's weird. Mom doesn't mean anything by it. Don't let her get to you. Easy for him to say. He wasn't the one hearing it every week. He wasn't the one being silently accused of something unforgivable. As Emily got older, the comments became more frequent, more direct, more cruel. At family gatherings, Linda would compare old photographs. She'd line up baby pictures of Jason beside current photos of Emily, studying them, analyzing them, searching for differences, searching for proof. Proof of what? I wasn't entirely sure. But I had a terrible feeling. One Thanksgiving dinner. Emily was 6 years old. She was coloring at the kitchen table. Completely innocent. Completely unaware. Linda stared at her for several seconds. Then finally said it. You know. She took a sip of wine. I still don't see Jason in her. The room went silent. My stomach dropped. Jason looked uncomfortable. His father immediately changed the subject. But the damage was already done. That night after everyone left, I finally broke. Why does your mother keep saying things like that? I asked. Jason sighed. The same sigh he always used whenever the conversation involved Linda. Sarah. No. I interrupted. I'm serious. He rubbed his forehead. She's just stubborn. She's implying Emily isn't your daughter. Jason froze. For the first time, I saw uncertainty in his eyes. Just for a second. One tiny second. But it was there. And it terrified me. Because once someone plants a seed of doubt, starts growing, even inside people who love you. I barely slept that night. I kept replaying every comment Linda had ever made. Every strange look. Every suspicious question. Every whispered conversation that suddenly stopped when I entered a room. And deep down, for the first time, I began to realize something. This wasn't random. This wasn't harmless. This wasn't an overprotective grandmother. Linda was building toward something. Something big. Something dangerous. And I had no idea how far she was willing to go. What I didn't know then was that she had already started planning it. Months earlier. Behind our backs. While smiling to our faces. While hugging her granddaughter. While pretending to be family. And before the year was over, she would secretly take something from my daughter. Something that would change all our lives forever. Looking back now, The signs were obvious. But when you're living through something in real time, you don't always recognize danger until it's already standing inside your house. And Linda Mitchell was becoming dangerous. Not physically, emotionally, mentally, obsessively. A few weeks after Thanksgiving, I started noticing strange things. Little things. Things that didn't seem important at first. One Saturday morning, Emily was sitting on our living room floor building a giant castle out of blocks. I was folding laundry while Jason watched football. The doorbell rang. Linda. Again. She wasn't supposed to visit that day. She hadn't called. Hadn't texted. Just showed up. Surprise, she said, holding a bag of cookies. Smiling. That fake smile I knew so well. Emily ran to hug her grandmother. Linda immediately knelt down beside her, brushing Emily's hair behind her ear, studying her face. Again. Always studying. Always looking. At one point I caught her taking photos. Lots of photos. More than usual. Emily smiling. Emily laughing. Emily looking sideways. Emily standing next to Jason. Emily standing next to me. I finally asked, "Why so many pictures?" Linda laughed. Too quickly. "Oh, grandparents take pictures." But something felt wrong. That night after she left, I noticed she'd posted several photos online. Not unusual. Except for the caption, "Family resemblance is fascinating." That was it. Nothing more. But my stomach tightened, because I knew exactly what she meant. Over the next few months things became stranger. Family members started acting differently around me. Jason's cousin Megan, his uncle Richard, even Linda's close friends. People would stare, whisper, stop talking when I entered the room. One afternoon I overheard part of a conversation. Linda says she's almost certain. Almost certain about what? The moment they saw me they changed subjects. My heart sank. She was talking to everyone, spreading doubts, creating rumors, and doing it behind my back. I confronted Jason again. "Your mother is telling people something." "Like what?" "That Emily isn't yours." Jason looked annoyed. "Sarah, you're overthinking this." Overthinking. That word. I hated that word. Because women hear it all the time. When something feels wrong. When our instincts scream at us. When we're trying to warn people. You're overthinking. You're imagining things. You're being emotional. No, I wasn't. And deep down, I think Jason knew it. Then came the Christmas dinner that changed everything. Every year the Mitchell family gathered at Linda's house. Around 20 relatives. Food everywhere. Kids running through hallways. Christmas music playing. The usual chaos. Emily was opening presents when Linda sat beside her, holding an old photo album. "Look at Daddy when he was your age." Emily smiled. "Wow." Linda flipped through page after page, then suddenly looked at everyone in the room. Funny. Silence. "She still doesn't resemble him." The room froze. Jason immediately stood up. "Mom." His voice was sharper than usual. But Linda didn't stop. "All I'm saying is what everyone else is thinking." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. I felt my face burn. And for the first time, I saw embarrassment on Jason's face. Real embarrassment. We left early that night. The drive home was silent. Emily eventually fell asleep in the back seat. Then Jason finally spoke. "I'm going to talk to her." I nodded. Good. Finally. The next day he visited Linda alone. When he returned, something felt off. "How did it go?" I asked. "Fine." "That's it." She apologized. But he wouldn't look me in the eye. And that's when I knew. Linda hadn't apologized. Not really. She'd said something else. Something that planted another seed. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into months. Then spring arrived. And so did the moment everything changed. It happened on a Friday afternoon. I had parent-teacher conferences scheduled at school. Jason was working late. Linda called unexpectedly. "Why don't I take Emily for ice cream?" Normally I would have said no. But Emily overheard and immediately got excited. "Please, Mom." I hesitated, then agreed. Biggest mistake of my life. Because that afternoon wasn't about ice cream. It wasn't about spending time with her granddaughter. It wasn't about family. It was about evidence. About proving a theory she had spent years obsessing over. A theory she believed more than the truth itself. What none of us knew was that during that innocent little outing, Linda would secretly collect something from Emily. Something she had been planning to obtain for months. And once she had it, she would begin setting a trap. A trap designed to destroy my marriage, destroy my reputation, and destroy the family she claimed she wanted to protect. But fate had other plans. Because the evidence Linda was gathering was about to expose a secret far bigger than mine. A secret she never imagined could come back to haunt her. There are moments in life when disaster begins with something so small, you don't even notice it happening. A smile, a conversation, a simple afternoon outing. And then months later, you realize that was the exact moment everything changed. It was the ice cream trip. Emily came home excited. Chocolate stains on her shirt, sprinkles in her hair, talking nonstop about how much fun she'd had with Grandma Linda. I remember smiling, listening, feeling relieved. Maybe things were getting better. Maybe I'd been wrong. Maybe Linda was finally starting to accept us. I couldn't have been more mistaken. A week later, Linda called again. "Emily and I had such a wonderful day." I forced a polite smile. "I'm glad. She's growing up so fast." There was something strange about her voice. Something almost triumphant. At the time I couldn't explain it. But later, I would remember that phone call and understand exactly why she sounded so pleased with herself. Because by then, she already had what she needed. A hairbrush. Emily's hairbrush. One she'd secretly slipped into her purse while Emily wasn't looking. Along with several strands of Emily's hair. At least that's what we eventually learned. But back then, we had no idea. Life continued. At least on the surface. School, work, family dinners, weekend soccer games. Yet something felt different. Linda became unusually confident. Almost smug. The comments stopped. The accusations stopped. The suspicious remarks stopped. And somehow, that worried me more. Because people like Linda don't suddenly change. They don't simply let things go. Not after years of obsession. Not after years of trying to prove something. The silence felt intentional. Like the calm before a storm. Then one evening Jason came home looking troubled. Mom called. I immediately felt my stomach tighten. "What now?" He shrugged. "Nothing really." "What did she say?" Jason hesitated. "She said we'll all know the truth soon." My blood ran cold. What truth? She wouldn't explain. For the first time, even Jason looked worried. That night neither of us slept much. I kept replaying those words. We'll all know the truth soon. What truth? What was she planning? And why did it sound like a threat? Over the next few weeks things got worse. Family members began acting even stranger. Some avoided eye contact. Some seemed uncomfortable around me. Others looked almost excited, as though they were waiting for something. Waiting for an announcement. Waiting for a scandal. One afternoon I overheard Jason's cousin Megan talking on the phone. I think Linda finally got proof. Proof. That word hit me like a punch. Proof of what? I already knew the answer. The same thing she'd been obsessed with for years. Emily. My daughter. The little girl who loved unicorns. Loved drawing. Loved baking cookies with me on Sundays. The little girl who had done absolutely nothing wrong. Yet somehow had become the center of Linda's obsession. The next month felt endless. Then came the invitation. A family dinner. Hosted by Linda. Every relative invited. Even people who rarely attended gatherings. The moment I saw the guest list, I knew something was coming. Something bad. Jason felt it too. Maybe she's trying to apologize. I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was impossible. Linda never apologized. Not sincerely. Never. The night of the dinner arrived. The entire family filled Linda's dining room. More than 20 people. The atmosphere felt strange. Like everyone knew something except me. I noticed whispered conversations. Nervous glances. Awkward smiles. And then I saw it. A large manila envelope sitting beside Linda's chair. My heart stopped. I knew instantly. I didn't know how. I didn't know why. But I knew. That envelope mattered. And somehow, it involved us. Dinner dragged on. Every minute felt longer than the last. Finally Linda stood up. She picked up the envelope. And smiled. A smile so confident. So satisfied. So certain. Ladies and gentlemen. The room fell silent. Jason looked confused. I felt sick. Linda slowly held up the envelope. And said the words that changed everything. For years I've suspected something. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then she looked directly at me. And smiled. I finally decided to find out the truth. The room exploded into whispers. My hand started shaking. And in that moment, I realized exactly what she'd done. The secret outings. The photographs. The obsession. The rumors. The confidence. It all pointed to one thing. A DNA test. A secret DNA test. And judging by the look on Linda's face, she believed she was about to destroy my life. What she didn't know was that the envelope she was holding contained something far more dangerous than proof. It contained the beginning of her own downfall. Because within minutes, everyone in that room would learn a secret that had been buried for more than 30 years. And Linda Mitchell would wish she'd never opened that envelope. The room was completely silent. 23 people. Not a single voice. Not a single sound. Just Linda standing at the head of the table with that smug smile on her face. Holding the envelope like it contained a winning lottery ticket. I could barely breathe. Jason looked confused. His father looked nervous. Everyone else looked curious. Linda slowly removed several sheets of paper. Then adjusted her glasses. This has been bothering me for years. She looked directly at me. And I think this family deserves the truth. My face burned. I wanted to walk out. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab Emily and leave. But I couldn't move. Because I needed to hear it. I needed to know how far she had gone. Linda cleared her throat. I obtained a DNA test. Gasps filled the room. Jason immediately stood up. You did what? Linda ignored him. I had every right. No, you didn't. Jason shouted. For the first time in years, I saw genuine anger in my husband's eyes. But Linda continued. I was protecting my son. The room became uncomfortable. Several relatives looked away. Even they knew she'd crossed a line. Then she lifted the report. For years I suspected Emily wasn't Jason's daughter. My heart shattered. Not because I was afraid. I knew the truth. But because she was saying it in front of everyone. In front of people who had watched Emily grow up. People who claimed to love her. She was humiliating an 8-year-old child. Jason's face turned red. Mom, stop. But Linda was too invested. Too confident. Too certain she was about to win. Then she smiled. And read the first result. The DNA test confirms. She paused dramatically. That Jason Mitchell is Emily Mitchell's biological father. Silence. Absolute silence. Linda froze. Her eyes widened. She looked back at the paper. Then read it again. Jason stared. I stared. Everyone stared. Because that wasn't the result she'd expected. That wasn't the result she'd promised everyone. Suddenly the confidence vanished from her face. For the first time all evening, Linda looked scared, and things were about to get much worse. Because Jason's cousin Megan spoke first. Wait. She pointed toward the report. What's that second page? Linda immediately tried to cover it. Too late. Megan had already seen it. And so had Jason. He walked over, grabbed the papers. Jason. Linda whispered. His face changed instantly. Confusion. Shock. Disbelief. Then something else. Fear. Real fear. I had never seen that expression before. What is it? I asked. Jason didn't answer. He kept staring. Reading. Reading again. Then finally he looked up. Directly at his mother. What is this? Linda's hands started shaking. Nobody moved. Nobody understood what was happening. Until Jason spoke again. Very quietly. So Emily is my daughter. Linda remained silent. But according to this, his voice cracked. You're not my mother. The room exploded. People jumped from their chairs. Voices erupted everywhere. What? That's impossible. No way. Did he read that correctly? I couldn't process what I just heard. Neither could anyone else. Linda suddenly looked like she might faint. Jason held up the report. The DNA company had included extended family matching data. The report showed strong biological links between Jason and Emily, but no biological relationship between Jason and Linda. None. 0. The percentages weren't even close. My legs nearly gave out. This wasn't possible. Linda was Jason's mother. Everyone knew that. She had raised him, loved him, protected him. Hadn't she? Then why was she looking terrified? Why wasn't she laughing? Why wasn't she calling the test inaccurate? Why wasn't she defending herself? Because she couldn't. Because deep down, she already knew. Jason slowly walked toward her, and the entire room moved out of his way. Tell me. Linda's lips trembled. Jason. Tell me the truth. The room was silent again. 34 years of secrets. 34 years of lies. 34 years of fear. All crashing down at once. Then Linda started crying. Not angry tears. Not frustrated tears. Guilty tears. And at that exact moment, everyone knew. The DNA test hadn't exposed me. It had exposed her. But nobody was prepared for what came next. Because the truth behind those results was even darker than anyone imagined. A secret buried since the day Jason was born. A secret involving an affair. A hospital. And a lie that had lasted more than 3 decades. And before the night was over, Linda would finally be forced to tell the story she'd spent her entire life hiding. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Nobody even seemed to breathe. The entire room was frozen. Jason stood in front of his mother, still holding the DNA report, still waiting for an answer. And Linda was crying. Not the dramatic kind of crying she'd used for years whenever she wanted sympathy. Not the fake tears. Not the manipulative tears. These were different. These were the tears of someone whose entire world had just collapsed. For over 30 years she had protected a secret. And now, a DNA test she ordered herself had ripped it into the open. Tell me, Jason said again. His voice barely above a whisper. Please. Linda covered her face. I never wanted you to find out like this. The room remained silent. Then Jason asked the question everyone was thinking. Find out what? Linda looked up. And for the first time since I'd known her, she looked vulnerable. Not powerful. Not controlling. Not judgmental. Just scared. Terrified. Then she finally spoke. When I was 23. Her voice trembled. I made a terrible mistake. Jason's father suddenly looked pale. Very pale. I noticed it immediately. and apparently so did everyone else, because several relatives turned toward him. Linda continued, "Your father and I were engaged." She looked toward her husband. At least, that's what everyone believed. A strange feeling settled in my stomach. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Then Linda said the words that changed everything. "I had an affair." Gasps echoed across the room. Jason closed his eyes. His father looked like he'd been punched. Several relatives started crying. No one had expected this. Not in a million years. Linda wiped her eyes. It lasted 4 months. The room remained silent. When I found out I was pregnant, she paused. I wasn't sure who the father was. Jason looked completely numb. Like his brain couldn't process what he was hearing. Neither could mine. For 34 years, everyone believed Linda and her husband had the perfect marriage. The stable marriage. The strong marriage. But it had all been built on a lie. I ended the affair. Linda continued. And I prayed the baby was Richard's. Richard. Jason's father. The man who had raised him. Loved him. Provided for him. Protected him. The man sitting at the end of the table looking absolutely devastated. Tears filled Richard's eyes. "You told me he was mine." Linda started sobbing. "I thought he was." "Thought?" Richard asked. The room grew even quieter, because everyone realized there was more. Much more. Then Linda revealed the part she had hidden for decades. When Jason was born, she swallowed hard. "I secretly took a paternity test." The room exploded. "What? You did what?" Jason looked physically sick. But Linda wasn't finished. The results came back. Her voice broke. And Richard wasn't the father. Silence. Complete silence. Richard looked like his heart had stopped. For 34 years he believed Jason was his biological son. And now, in less than 10 seconds, everything had changed. Then came the worst part. The part nobody expected. I destroyed the results. Jason stared. Richard stared. Everyone stared. I burned them. Linda started crying harder. I told nobody. The room erupted again. She had known. Known for 34 years. And never told anyone. Not her husband. Not her son. Not a single person. Jason took a step backward. As though he no longer recognized the woman standing in front of him. 'Cause maybe he didn't. All these years. He whispered. "You knew." Linda nodded. Jason looked shattered. Completely shattered. Then Richard suddenly stood up. And what he said next stunned everyone. "That's not the whole truth." Every head turned. Including Linda's. Her face immediately went white. Pure white. Because somehow, Richard knew something. Something Linda hadn't confessed. Something even worse. Something she thought would stay buried forever. And judging by the fear in her eyes, whatever Richard was about to reveal could destroy what little remained of their family. The room was silent. Every eye was on Richard. Even Linda looked terrified. For the first time all night, she seemed completely powerless. Richard slowly stood from his chair. His hands were shaking. His face was pale. "I stayed quiet for 34 years, he said. "But if we're telling the truth tonight," he looked directly at Linda. "Tell them about Michael." Linda's eyes widened. The moment she heard that name, everyone knew. There was more. Much more. "Richard," she whispered. "No," he interrupted. "Tell them." Jason looked confused. "Who's Michael?" Linda burst into tears. And Richard finally answered. "The man she had the affair with." The room went silent again. Jason slowly sat down, as if his legs could no longer hold him. Then Richard revealed something nobody expected. "I found out about Michael 28 years ago." Gasps filled the room. Linda looked shocked. "You knew?" Richard laughed bitterly. "Of course I knew. For decades he had carried this secret alone. I found old letters, Richard explained. Love letters. Linda covered her face. And suddenly the perfect marriage everyone admired didn't seem so perfect anymore. Richard had known. Not everything, but enough. He knew there had been another man. What he didn't know was that Jason wasn't his biological son. Not until tonight. The room felt heavy. Years of lies. Years of secrets. Years of pretending. All collapsing at once. Then Jason asked the question everyone feared. Who is Michael? Linda wiped away tears and finally gave an answer. He lives in Arizona. Jason stared. He's alive. Linda nodded. Jason looked like he'd been hit by a truck. For 34 years, his biological father had been alive, living an ordinary life, completely unaware he had a son, or maybe not unaware at all. Because Linda's next words shocked everyone. I told him. The room erupted. You what? Jason couldn't believe it. Neither could Richard. Linda broke down completely. I told him I was pregnant. She sobbed. He didn't want a family. The room fell silent. He told me never to contact him again. Jason lowered his head. For a moment, I thought he might cry. But instead, he just looked exhausted. Like 34 years of truth had hit him all at once. Then something unexpected happened. Richard walked toward him and placed a hand on his shoulder. Listen to me. Jason looked up. Richard's eyes were full of tears. But his voice was steady. I may not be your biological father. He paused. But I am your dad. Nobody in the room could hold back tears. Not even me. As Richard was right. DNA creates biology, but love creates family. Jason hugged him, and for the first time that night, something started healing. Then Jason turned toward Linda and asked one final question, the question that would decide everything. Why? Linda looked confused. Why what? Jason's eyes filled with tears. Why spend years accusing Sarah? The room became silent again, because finally, the real issue wasn't the affair, or the DNA test, or Michael. It was Sarah. It was Emily. Why had Linda obsessed over proving my daughter didn't belong? Linda looked down, ashamed, and finally admitted the truth. Because every time she looked at Emily, she remembered her own lie. She spent years projecting her guilt onto me. Years convincing herself another woman must be hiding a secret, because she couldn't live with hers. And suddenly, everything made sense. Every accusation, every insult, every cruel comment, every suspicious look. It was never about me. It was always about her. And now, there was nowhere left to hide. For the next few days, nobody spoke to Linda. Not really. Family group chats went silent. Phone calls stopped. Invitations disappeared. It was as if 34 years of trust had vanished overnight. As in many ways, it had. The hardest conversation came 3 days later. When Jason and I sat down with Emily. She was only 8 years old. Too young to understand affairs. Too young to understand DNA reports. Too young to understand decades of lies. But children always know when something is wrong. Why is Grandma crying all the time? Emily asked. My heart broke. Jason took her hand and gave the simplest explanation possible. Grandma made some mistakes a long time ago. Emily looked confused. Big mistakes. Jason nodded. Very big mistakes. Then Emily asked a question nobody expected. Does she still love me? The room fell silent, because despite everything, Emily still loved her grandmother. Children are incredible that way. They don't carry years of resentment. They don't obsess over revenge. They just love. Jason smiled sadly. Yes. Then I forgive her. Emily said. I felt tears fill my eyes. Because the person showing the most maturity in the entire family was an 8-year-old child. A week later, Jason made a decision. He contacted Michael, his biological father, the man he'd never met, the man he'd spent 34 years not knowing existed. To everyone's surprise, Michael replied immediately, and what happened next shocked us all. Michael had no idea. Linda had lied. Again. She never told him she was pregnant. Never. Instead, she had sent one letter. One. And after never hearing back, she assumed he'd abandoned her. The truth? Michael had never received it. Not a single letter. Not a single message. Not a single phone call. For 34 years, he never knew he had a son. When Jason told him the truth, the man cried. Actually cried. The first video call lasted 3 hours. The second lasted 4. And within months, Jason flew to Arizona. When they finally met face to face, neither could stop crying. Two strangers, connected by blood, separated by lies, finding each other after more than 3 decades. It wasn't perfect. It couldn't be. You can't replace 34 lost years. But it was real. And for Jason, that mattered. Meanwhile, Linda's life continued falling apart. Not because anyone wanted revenge. Because trust has consequences. Her sisters stopped confiding in her. Relatives stopped asking her advice. Family gatherings became awkward. Nobody knew what to believe anymore. If she could lie for 34 years, what else had she lied about? That question followed her everywhere. Months later, Linda asked to meet me. Alone. First, I didn't want to go. After everything she'd done, I felt I didn't owe her anything. But eventually, I agreed. We met at a small coffee shop. And for the first time since I'd known her, she looked old. Not physically. Emotionally. The confidence was gone. The arrogance was gone. The judgment was gone. Only regret remained. She sat quietly for several moments, then finally said something I never expected to hear. I was wrong. Simple words. Yet they had taken her years to say. Tears rolled down her face. I spent so much time looking for someone else's secret. She paused. I never dealt with my own. I didn't respond, because honestly, there wasn't much left to say. Then she looked at me. Sarah. Her voice broke. I'm sorry. For years I had imagined hearing those words. Years. And yet, when they finally arrived, they didn't feel victorious. They felt sad. Because apologies don't erase damage. They don't erase humiliation. They don't erase accusations. They don't erase pain. But they matter. And so I nodded. Not because everything was forgiven, but because carrying anger forever is exhausting. Then I stood up. And before leaving, I said something she needed to hear. The DNA test proved one thing. She looked up. What? I smiled. Emily belongs exactly where she's supposed to. And for the first time, Linda cried without trying to defend herself. A year later, our family looked very different. Not perfect, but honest. Jason had a relationship with Michael. Richard remained his dad. Nothing could change that. Emily continued being the happiest child in the world. And Linda? She spent the rest of her life learning a painful lesson. The lesson karma had been waiting 34 years to teach. Because the DNA test she secretly ordered to expose me ended up exposing the one person hiding the biggest secret of all. Her. And that's the funny thing about the truth. You can run from it. You can bury it. You can hide it for decades. But eventually, it always finds its way home. The end.